Moving on to the Second World War, the Lithuanians were the only ones who in 1941 were able to restore their provisional government for a short time. The Latvians and Estonians couldn't attempt that, well, partly because the Lithuanian experience wasn't successful. The Holocaust was, of course, a much more central issue here than it was in Estonia. I mean, Estonia was proclaimed Judenfrei by the Nazis, but it's still, the Holocaust is not an issue which is central to the Estonian historical debate, because the actual figures are so tiny compared to Latvia and Lithuania in particular. The anti-Soviet resistance after the war, we all shared in that, but the Lithuanian activity was roughly 10 times greater than that of the Estonians or Latvians. The partisans or anti-Soviet resistance survived much longer and was centrally organized for a while here, which it never was in Estonia or Latvia. And the main legacy of the Soviet rule was demographic change, a massive in-migration from the east for Estonia and Latvia, which didn't occur in the case of Lithuania, and that might partly be related to the same aforementioned resistance, but also the role of the Communist Party, which I know is a matter of controversy and debate, of course, in Lithuania, but it's certainly without a doubt that the nature of the Communist Party was somewhat different here than Latvia and in Estonia, where the Communist Party was very much seen as an alien body, and its leadership mainly was non-Estonian and non-Latvian, or if it was Estonian and Latvian, then it was only that the individuals had grown up and been educated in Soviet Russia, which also accounts for in the transition, I would say, in the 90s, the fact that the Estonians were the only post-Soviet country or post-communist country which never re-elected the successor party to the communists. And I don't mean into government, but even into parliament at all. Zero representation. It was such an alien body, and I mean ethnically as well. But coming to our singing revolution, before I say a few words about the transition, there, a metaphor that I use, which you may have heard elsewhere, is that of a team cycling race. In a velodrome where you have 3 cyclists and going around in laps, and the one in the front is doing all the hard work, and the other 2 are in the windstream and coasting, and then after one does a few laps and is tired, then the next one takes over, etc. And then we look at the period to achieve our independence from, say, 87 to 91, then you can, okay, this is perhaps a little bit of an artificial construct, but see that the leader at first, for a short period, were the Latvians, then the Estonians, and then finally over the finish line were the Lithuanians. In that, and you can perhaps see a correlation here, or at least Rein Taagepera does, of the demographic shift or the ethnic composition in the country during the Soviet period. That the Latvians reacted first in the opportunity during Gorbachev's glasnost, because of a feeling of an existential threat of becoming a minority in their own homeland, and thus they were in a more desperate situation. But that also meant that they were not able to continue that struggle once they ran into a counterforce, that is the Interfront or the Soviet loyalists in the military-industrial, the workers in the military-industrial complex in Riga and the big cities. And then it was the Estonian turn. The Estonians led in the democratization, the declaration of sovereignty, but Estonians also encountered that same counterforce, but not to such a degree as the Latvians. And you could say from late 1989, then it was the Lithuanian phase until the final achievement of independence, where the Lithuanians were more united, more homogeneous, and made that final brave push for full independence. And remember, there was an anecdote at the time that the bloodiest events of the struggle for independence took place here, and Estonia was lucky to escape with no violence or victims whatsoever. And there was a saying at the time that the Estonians are willing to fight for their independence to the last Lithuanian. But on to the transition. Estonians were much more radical. We were first in having our own currency, first in our own new constitution, first in holding elections, and in liberalization and privatization. And I'm sure you've all heard that success story ad nauseum. The Lithuanians, as mentioned, surprised the world with the re-election of the successor party to the Communist Party, which I think in domestic circumstances is quite explainable. It was perhaps a bit more difficult understanding it from the outside. And the Latvians were, as always, somewhere in between. I mean, this is a little bit unfair to the Latvians, and it's said half in jest, but often it does appear that we have sort of two poles or two extremes of this experience with the Estonian and the Lithuanian, and often you can characterize the Latvians somewhere. I know this is not a very scientific approach in any way. And Estonians, and it was very important that there was a complete rupture from the past. I already mentioned the role of the Communist Party, which was, and the successor party, which was completely shut out of public life, that all the sensible communists went into business and did well there, didn't remain in politics. And we had this new generation, the Lennart Meri, the late Lennart Meri, who became the first foreign minister. Famously, his first act as foreign minister was to fire or call for the resignation of all the members of the staff. Of course, then it was the foreign ministry of the Estonian Soviet Socialist Republic, so it wasn't a real foreign ministry in that sense. But that was an example often followed. So these young people, like much of the audience here, people who were recruited then into the ministries because they were enthusiastic, knew English, knew other languages, and didn't have any experience, but were willing to take big risks, and which sometimes paid off, sometimes didn't. But it means that some of the most experienced Estonian officials and diplomats are younger than I am today. There's something that's been in the Estonian press in this last week. Sven Mikser was elected the new head of the Social Democrats. Great hopes placed on him. And he's doing an Obama-style campaign of change in this younger generation. And he's campaigning against the old farts like Mart Laar. Can you imagine? Mart Laar is already, he's now turned 50. He was 32 when he became prime minister in 92, but now he's the old generation, and there's talk in the Estonian media of stagnation because all these old guys are still there. So that gives you an impression of the difference in the radicalism. So, of course, I've said a lot of words of praise here about Estonia, but Lithuania had its firsts as well. You were first in being able to secure the withdrawal of Soviet troops in '93. It took Estonia and Latvia one further year. You were the first to have your border treaty ratified with Russia. We've ratified ours, but the other side, of course, has withdrawn their signature. And if anyone wants to ask about the details, we can talk about that later. Of course, this is also related to the question of the Russian minority in Estonia and Latvia. Our citizenship laws, Estonia and Latvia on one hand, Lithuania on the other hand, differ very substantially because of that. And often it's thought that the relationship with Russia also has some bearing on this. And an argument that I would like to make, which seems to go against common sense, but I'm emphasizing this because everyone seems to assume so, because it does seem so logical, is that there's a correlation between the treatment of the Russian minority and the bilateral relationship between states. But I mean, if you look at the relationship today, it's quite obvious that that's not the case, because I would argue that the country, the Baltic state that enjoys the best relationship, the warmest relationship, the least problems with Russia today is Latvia. And Latvia clearly has the most restrictive citizenship policy and also has the largest Russian minority. Whereas, forgive me if you see otherwise, but I think that Lithuania is slightly ahead of Estonia in having a worse relationship with Russia. I base this on the fact that only Lithuania has ever used its veto power in the European Union by blocking the beginning of the negotiations or giving the mandate to start the European Union-Russia Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. Estonia and Latvia did not support Lithuania on this. Estonia and Latvia were busy trying to prove desperately to our European partners that we are good Europeans and not Russophobes. But my point here is that even though it seems to make sense that the situation of the Russian ethnic minority has an impact on bilateral relations, I think the facts on the ground show that there is in fact zero correlation between those two things. Moving along again, I said a few words about Baltic cooperation in the 20s and 30s, some words about it now in the 90s and the present. Of course, we were quick in setting up all sorts of institutions already during in 1990 with the Baltic Assembly and the Baltic Council of Ministers, which still function regularly today, but without any, say, great enthusiasm. I think perhaps illustrative of this would be when the Estonian Parliament has to form a delegation for whatever meetings that it might have. The Baltic Assembly delegation is the one that tends to be the least popular amongst the parliamentarians for some reason, which I think is unfortunate. But after this Baltic cooperation, which worked very well because it was directed against our external pressure, that is our drive to independence, and then securing the withdrawal of the Russian military in subsequent years, then enthusiasm for Baltic cooperation faded. Everyone wanted to demonstrate their own sovereignty, and of course the Baltic states really, even though everyone from the outside expects we should cooperate, we're in many senses more competitors than we are partners, because we have the same sort of resources, we compete to export to the same markets, we compete for the same foreign direct investment. So the fact of cooperation, the fact that we have that good cooperation, I think is still remarkable. But in the period in the mid to late 90s, I would say Baltic cooperation was led by external expectations.